President Trump is now responding after his lengthy 2-hour phone call with President Vladimir Putin today. In a post on social media, Trump says that ceasefire negotiations between Russia and Ukraine will begin immediately. Now, before the call with Putin, Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and we should note that delegations from both those countries already started speaking a few days ago, albeit at a lower level. Let's take you now live to Kyiv with CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh. Nick, what are you hearing from officials there regarding this statement from Trump?
Yeah, not a lot from the Ukrainian side yet. We may hear from the Ukrainian president soon, but it was the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, who was kind of first out the gate here after the phone call, speaking to state media, essentially saying that there could potentially be a ceasefire if documents, memorandums were worked on, suggesting there could be compromises on both sides in the future, and indeed saying that he noted that President Trump said Russia was in favour of peace, but importantly saying the key thing is addressing the root causes of the conflict. And through what Putin said, important to point out, no real substantive concession or practical move forward from the Russian president. Interesting to hear him say similar things that we heard in Istanbul from lower level officials, but no real change in his position and harking back to root causes. Well, that's talking about all sorts of things to do with the expansion of NATO and the often false Russian narrative about how we got here. President Trump emerging an hour or so later and putting out a lengthy post in which, to some degree, he tries to sound very positive about that conversation, but also there's a tone slightly of him stepping back. No longer the guy saying, let me get Zelensky and Putin together, I'm willing to broker that meeting. In fact, no mention at all of the two presidents meeting from President Trump, except suggesting, indeed, that the conditions for a ceasefire will be negotiated between the two parties as only it can be, because they know the details of a negotiation no one else would be aware of. That's not putting the US at the heart of that. A lot of talk about the positive future for potentially trade and the economy. A lot of talk about all the European allies he briefed alongside Volodymyr Zelensky, who got into his ear just before that phone call with Putin in a separate unanticipated earlier call, but also too throwing to the Vatican, saying maybe they could be the host for these talks. A different tone from the man who a matter of days ago was saying, let me try and get Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky together and be the peace broker here. And that may be a reflection, I think, of, frankly, how he got nothing we can see of substance out of his conversation with Vladimir Putin.
Nick Payton-Walsh, live for us in Kyiv. Thank you so much. We're joined now by CNN Chief National Security Analyst Jim Sciutto to break down the details. Jim, here Trump's striking a positive tone, but as only it can be. That phrase about the negotiations being directly between Russia and Ukraine, is it fair to read that as the U.S. just stepping back?
It may be. In fact, I spoke to a senior European diplomat just a few moments ago for his reactions to this, and two things he pointed out from both readouts. One is exactly the point you bring up. This appears to be the U.S. not involved directly in these talks. Trump basically saying, you two talk together, we'll be in the background. One. Two, no mention of U.S. sanctions on Russia. In other words, that stick that had been looming over. And now, listen, one might calculate that Trump heard enough positive in that phone call that he doesn't feel the need to deploy that now. But we should always remember the Trump administration quite quickly sanctioned Ukraine early on when the perception was from the White House it was not signing on to the ceasefire. The third thing I was going to mention, there is no mention of a commitment to a ceasefire here from either Trump or Putin. They're just going to continue talking. And that had been the demand, right? And that had been the source of Trump's frustration, was that Russia was not abiding by the ceasefire. There'd been no answer. And at least based on these readouts, no further Russian commitment to sign on.
Yeah, only more bombing and drones and further military action. Jim Sciutto, thanks so much for the perspective. Jessica?
All right, thanks, guys. And for more on all of this, let's bring in Michael Massaquoi. He's a former spokesperson for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, now a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thanks so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
So I just want to start by pointing out that Putin previously ignored this 30-day ceasefire proposal from Washington and Kyiv. He ignored that the 30-day ceasefire kind of threat from those European leaders. Why is this time different?
Well, I think actually we're no further to peace than we were, say, a couple of weeks ago. There's a couple of pieces of bad news. One is that, as Nick pointed out, Mr. Putin said we need to examine the root causes of the conflict. it's exactly what he said, is that that's going to spin things out longer. He doesn't want to see Zelensky stay. He doesn't want to see Ukraine as part of NATO. The other bad news more for Ukraine is in the Trump long statement is there was nothing about a commitment to continue military aid and intelligence gathering. The good news from my point of view is that it does look like, yes, the US is stepping back. Let's give the Turkeys of the world a chance, or even the Vatican, because Turkey, of course, has a great stake in Black Sea security, great relations with both countries. I think things could move faster that way.
And how would you evaluate Putin at this moment in time? Do you think he's serious about trying to find an end to this war?
No, absolutely not. The grand chess player dealing with the master of the art of the deal. And Putin wants to continue on grabbing more Ukrainian territory. He wants to continue destroying Ukraine with those massive drone and missile strikes. And he wants to get his way with Crimea, the 4 oblasts that they only partially control. And also they've also said they don't want to pay war reparations, which Ukraine is demanding, and which could add up to about $1 trillion.
Yeah. And we know that Zelensky spoke with President Trump today. That conversation actually coming before the president spoke with Vladimir Putin. Knowing that, seeing the readouts that we've gotten from Trump and also Putin and Russian state media, what does that suggest to you? How do you put all those pieces together?
Yeah, I think that Trump spoke first to Zelensky was a good move. It was probably payback to Mr. Putin for making him wait 1 hour in their call in March. But I hope there was one thing that Mr. Zelensky pushed for, and that is unfreezing of about $300 billion in frozen Russian assets by the G7. That is somewhere where the U.S. could really put forward its influence and leverage that. That could be put, for example, into a Ukraine compensation fund, because again, Russia does not want to pay reparations. And Zelensky probably also said, please continue the U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing, because without that, it's going to be game over for Ukraine. And again, we did not, as far as I can see, we did not see that in the Trump statement. Could be a bit worrisome there.
I do want to go back to something you mentioned, which was just Putin continuing to say this idea that he wants to eliminate the causes of the conflict, examine and get to the bottom of the causes of the conflict. Help people understand what he's getting at there.
Yeah, that is a Kremlin code or narrative for, again, we want Ukraine. They're basically saying Ukraine is a failed state. It should become a satellite state of Russia. And for that to happen, we need to take control. It's not a good thing that he's repeating that at this far along in the game. So again, I'm hoping that the Turks, who have been involved in Ukraine negotiations way back to 2014. They ran the OSCE mission I was a part of, that they can have a bit more influence on Putin. Finally, you know, I mean, I'm in Thailand right now, and it's one of the countries, along with the UAE and some African countries, that are helping Russia circumvent sanctions. That news needs to be tightened as quickly as possible. I think only then will Putin come to some sense and, you know, be more fair at the negotiating table.
Listen, that's what everyone continues to say again and again, is that there need to be more consequences to push him to that negotiating table. Michael Bossyk, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.